All right, I just started. Good evening, everyone. Good evening and Happy New Year, and welcome to the Haverford Township Board of Commissioners Annual Reorganization Meeting for January 4th, 2021. First item of business is the roll call. Mr. D'Amelio.
Here.
Mr. Oliva.
Here.
Mr. McCluskey.
Here.
Mr. Siegel.
Here.
Mr. Lewis.
Here.
Mr. Holmes.
Here.
Mr. Quinn.
Here.
Dr. Hart.
Here.
And Mr. Wexler.
Here.
And I'd ask you all to please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Berman,
Yes.
we have just a moment for Nick Saba, if that's possible.
Yes, that sounds fine, Chief. We'll take a moment of silence in memory of Nick Saba of the Oakmont Fire Company, who recently passed away due to complications of COVID-19. Thank you for the reminder, Chief.
You're welcome, thank you.
So my name is Dave Berman. I'm the Township Manager for Haverford Township. I'll chair this meeting briefly while the board reorganizes and elects a president for calendar year 2021. I did want to say a few words before moving on to the next part of the meeting. I want to thank some very important people, and specifically the residents of Haverford Township. We all know that last year was unlike any other in our lifetimes. Many of you experienced economic loss, others grew ill, and still others lost loved ones. Here at the Township, we were called upon to make some very difficult decisions, some that resulted in frustration among many of our residents. In the end, you allowed us to do our job and to continue serving, and for that we are very grateful. At the same time, many of the residents experienced flooding and other losses during the year. We tried to help the best we can. Sometimes that wasn't good enough, but you understood that, and we appreciate that. To keep our employees safe, we cut back early in the pandemic on some of our work and services that we offered, in particular the brush collection. And we thank you for understanding that we did what we needed to do. Some complained, but by and large, most understood. And for that, again, we are very grateful. In some ways, we did some good things in 2020. For the first time in many years, we hosted an electronics drop-off right here at the Township building, and we plan to do so again in 2021. Likewise, we hosted a very successful shredding event here at the Township building. We conducted our annual tree giveaway, and with the help of volunteers, we helped our neighbors right here in the Township by hosting a weekly food collection at the Creek. And on top of all that, somehow Public Works completed the leaf collection this year on time, or close to on time, even in the face of a December snowstorm. So good things can happen during a pandemic, and we look forward to that positive momentum going into 2021. And finally, I want to thank the Board of Commissioners. With all the crazy decisions we had to make, the board stood behind us 100%. Every single one of these elected officials is dedicated to serving this community, and for that, we are grateful. And with that, the floor is now open to nominations for President of the Board of Commissioners for calendar year 2021.
Mr. Secretary,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion to nominate Dr. Jerry Hart as President of the Board of Commissioners. Second.
We have a nomination of Dr. Hart by Mr. Oliva, seconded by Mr. D'Amelio. Are there any other nominations for president? Is there a motion to close the nominations?
Motion to close.
Motion to close by Mr. Quinn, second by, is there a second?
Anybody?
Anybody, that's fine.
Yeah, you can put me down.
Thank you, sir. And now we'll go through the roll call for President of the Board of Commissioners for calendar year 2021. Mr. D'Amelio?
Mr. Hart.
Mr. Oliva?
Dr. Hart.
Mr. McCluskey?
Dr. Hart.
Mr. Siegel?
Dr. Hart.
Mr. Lewis?
Dr. Hart.
Mr. Holmes?
Dr. Hart.
Mr. Quinn?
Jerry Hart.
Dr. Hart?
Jerry Hart.
Mr. Wexler?
Dr. Hart.
Congratulations, Dr. Hart.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored. I greatly appreciate everybody's support. Certainly will pledge to you that I will work with all of you in a bipartisan manner as we continue to try to serve the residents of Haverford Township. I also wanted to give a special thanks to Commissioner Wexler for serving as president this past year in what was, as we've all said, a most difficult year. It really must be incredibly tiring. I'm sort of happy to maybe look back on it. So thanks again for that. And let's move on to agenda item number 3, nominations for Vice President of the Board of Commissioners.
Mr. President.
Yes.
Mr. President.
Yes.
I nominate the 4th Ward Commissioner Dan Siegel for Vice President of the Board of Commissioners.
Second. Any other nominations?
Mr. President, I'd like to nominate Connor Quinn to serve as Vice President of the Board of Commissioners.
Second.
Any other nominations? Is there a motion to close?
So
Motion to close.
Mr. Berman, can you call the roll?
Mr. D'Amelio?
Mr. Quinn.
Mr. Oliva?
Connor Quinn.
Mr. McCluskey?
Dan Siegel.
Mr. Siegel?
Dan Siegel.
Mr. Lewis?
Connor Quinn.
Mr. Holmes?
Commissioner Siegel.
Mr. Quinn?
I'll go with Connor Quinn.
Dr. Hart? I'm sorry, Mr. Wexler?
I'm going to go with Mr. Siegel for his last year as commissioner.
And now Dr. Hart.
First vote of the year, most difficult. Mr. Siegel has served this board with distinction for 11 years. It's been a pleasure to serve with him. Mr. Quinn has only been on the board for a year, but we've worked together very closely on a number of issues that I felt are very important. I feel like for this board to move forward in a bipartisan manner, I'm going to vote for Mr. Quinn.
Congratulations, Mr. Quinn.
Thank you to the board, and thank you to Bill and to Larry for serving, and I look forward to working with all of you.
You're welcome.
Agenda item number 4, appointments administrative. First one is Township Solicitor.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to appoint Mickle, Byrne, and Metlosky Law Firm to continue as our township solicitor.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Quinn. Any other nominations?
President, I'd like to make a motion to appoint the law offices of Sean Kilkenny to serve as the township solicitor.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other nominations? Is there a motion to close?
So moved.
So moved.
Moved.
Mr. Berman, would you call the roll?
Mr. D'Amelio.
McNichol, Byrne, Matlowski.
Mr. Oliva.
Nickel, Byrne, Matlowski.
Mr. McCluskey.
Law offices of Sean Kilkenny.
Mr. Siegel.
I just submitted to Mr. Berman a recusal statement. I cannot vote on this matter because of a professional conflict.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis.
McNichol, Byrne, Matlowski.
Mr. Holmes.
McNichol, Byrne, Matlowski.
Mr. Wexler.
McNichol, Byrne, and Matlowski.
Mr. Quinn.
Go with, Nickel, Byrne, and Matlowski.
Dr. Hart.
With the other firm.
Okay.
Congratulations to Mr. Byrne.
Jim?
All right, thank you very much, appreciate it. Look forward to working with you again.
Next item is civil service solicitor. Are there any motions?
Mr. President, I would make a motion to table this item and ask that we re-advertise.
Second.
We'll join that.
Have a motion to close.
Motion to close.
Motion to close.
Okay, can we have just a vote, an aye vote, up or down on that?
Aye.
Aye.
Table? Aye.
The table.
Aye.
The table and re-advertise. Mr. Berman, do you have a recommendation for the township engineer?
Dr. Hart, on behalf of the entire township staff, I believe we would all support Pannoni as our township engineer.
Sorry, Dave, we're going to stand on ceremony here, Mr. Berman. So this vote is a confirmation of your appointment. Do you appoint him and seek our approval for township engineer?
Thank you for refreshing my memory. Yes, the township manager appoints Pannoni as the township engineer and seeks your approval.
I make a motion to confirm the township manager's appointment.
Second.
We have a vote, an aye vote to appoint Mr. Pannoni.
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
nays? Any nays? Mr. Pannoni's appointed.
Thank you all.
Good to have you, Dave.
Congratulations, Dave.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Agenda item number 5 is resolution number 2201, 2021, appointments to boards and commissions.
Make a motion to adopt a resolution 2201 for the year 2021, appointing the following boards and commissions.
Second.
Second.
Mr. Berman, could you call the roll?
Mr. D'Amelio.
Yes.
Mr. Oliva.
Yes.
Mr. McCluskey.
Yes.
Mr. Siegel.
Yes.
Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
Mr. Holmes.
Yes.
Mr. Quinn. Mr. Wexler.
Yes.
Mr. Quinn.
Yes.
Dr. Hart.
Yes. Cable TV Advisory Board for a 4-year term. There are 2 appointments. Have motion?
There are.
I believe so.
I believe there was a second one.
There's only one on the agenda.
We have an unexpired term ending at 12/31/22. Is there another one open?
There was, because Michael Muterick passed a few months ago, so there are 2 positions open there had been one open prior that had never been filled.
So there are three.
Now, there's two.
There are two openings.
So the one appointment is to finish Mr. Muderick's term, and the other is a 4-year term. Is that right?
Right.
Okay.
Let's vote first on the 4-year term. Are there motions?
I'll make a motion to appoint Dave Fabry to the Cable Advisory Board.
Second.
Motion to
Any-
close.
Is there a second?
Yes, second.
Vern, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. D'Amelio.
Mr. Farby.
Mr. Oliva.
Mr. Fabry.
Mr. McCluskey.
Fabry.
Mr. Siegel.
Mr. Fabry,
Mr. Lewis.
Fabry.
Mr. Holmes.
Mr. Fabry.
Mr. Wexler.
Dave Fabry.
Mr. Quinn.
Dave Fabry.
Dr. Hart.
Dave Fabry. Okay, congratulations, Mr. Fabry. And Mr. Siegel, how long is the other term for?
I am not.
2 more years. It expires on December 31st, 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes.
You're welcome.
A motion to approve, to appoint anyone to the unexpired 2-year term?
There is,
I believe Robert Sullivan was one
Mr.
of
Mr. President, I make a motion to appoint Robert Sullivan, the unexpired 2-year term.
Second.
Any other nominations? Is there a motion to close?
Motion closed.
Mr. Byrne, would you call the roll?
Mr. D'Amelio.
Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Oliva.
Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. McCluskey.
Sullivan.
Mr. Siegel.
Mr. Sullivan,
Mr. Lewis.
Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Holmes.
Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Wexler.
Robert Sullivan.
Mr. Quinn.
That was Robert Sullivan.
Dr. Hart.
Mr. Sullivan. Okay, we appointments to the Environmental Advisory Council, 2-year terms. First Ward. Steve, do you have anybody?
No, I have to table mine.
Okay. Mr. Oliva?
I'd like to table mine also.
Okay. Mr. McCloskey?
Megan Schuster Gould.
Mr. Siegel?
Melissa Romano, reappointment.
Mr. Lewis?
Victor Barsky, a reappointment.
Mr. Holmes?
Robert Graff, reappointment, unless he was somebody else's. I think he was mine 2 years ago.
He's yours.
He's yours now.
Yeah, he's mine now. I call him.
Mr. Quinn?
I'm gonna go with Henry Eichmann. Henry Eichmann.
In Ward 8, I will reappoint Peter Pugliese. And Mr. Wexler?
I'll reappoint Hank Schwab.
If any of you in the first or second wards need candidates, I've got about 6 people in the 8th ward who are interested. So
I have a candidate. I just want to confirm that they want to do it for another year before I go ahead and reappoint.
before we move on to the Friends of the Grange, which are 1-year terms, we have 3 spots according to this. We told 5 people that they would be appointed, so I don't know how we would go about this during the interview process. We did not. Are we going to appoint 3 people now and 2 people later?
I think it might be best to appoint the 3 now and then to appoint the
Yeah, I think you'd have to expand the board first.
Okay, well, I don't think there's anything in our bylaws that talk about the number of people on the Friends of the Grange. It just says we appoint, but whatever.
Why don't we go ahead and make our preference is known for the two positions that aren't currently contemplated, next week we'll take official action to take the two and validate what we did today.
Okay, well, we'll do our first three then, and then we'll have potentially two others next week.
But let's say the other two. I mean, let's announce to the public, they interviewed, they went through the process, let's have them do it tonight.
Once we're done this vote, then we'll do that, right? Is that what you're saying? All right.
Okay, so let's have if we have any motions to appoint or reappoint.
Yes, I would like to reappoint Chad Brooks to serve on the Friends of the Green for a one-year term to expire on December 31st, 2021.
Second.
Any other nominations? Motion to close?
Motion closed.
For a second?
Second.
Okay. Mr. Berman?
Mr. D'Amelio.
Chad Brooks.
Mr. Oliva.
Chad Brooks.
Mr. McCluskey.
Chad Brooks.
Mr. Siegel.
Chad Brooks.
Mr. Lewis.
Chad Brooks.
Mr. Holmes.
Chad Brooks.
Mr. Wexler.
Chad Brooks.
Mr. Quinn.
Chad Brooks.
Dr. Hart.
Chad Brooks. Do I have another motion to appoint?
Motion to appoint Rochelle Nocido.
Here a
Second.
Any other nominations? Is there a motion to close?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Oliva. Okay, Mr. Berman?
Mr. D'Amelio.
Michelle Nocito.
Mr. Oliva.
Rochelle Nocito.
Mr. McCluskey.
Ms. Nocido.
Mr. Siegel.
Ms. Nocito.
Mr. Lewis.
Michelle Nocito.
Mr. Holmes.
Business, Cito.
Mr. Wexler.
Michelle Nocito.
Mr. Quinn.
Ms. Nocito.
Dr. Hart.
Ms. Nocito. For this third spot, do I have any nominations?
I'd like to appoint Stephen Pierce to serve on the Friends of the Green for a one-year term to expire on December 31st, 2021.
Second.
Any other nominations? Is there a motion to close?
Motion closed.
Motion closed.
Okay, Mr. Berman?
Mr. D'Amelio.
We didn't second that motion, did we?
Seconded, yeah, I seconded.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Pierce.
Mr. Oliva.
Stephen Pierce.
Mr. McCluskey.
Mr. Pierce.
Mr. Siegel.
Mr. Pierce.
Mr. Lewis.
Stephen Pierce.
Mr. Holmes.
Mr. Pierce.
Mr. Wexler.
Mr. Pierce.
Mr. Quinn.
Stephen Pierce.
Dr. Hart.
Stephen Pierce. I believe the two other interviewees that we had advised that we would appoint were Mark Elder and Tim, and the other one was a reappointment of Tim Wistman. So maybe we can take care of that next week.
Why don't we at least conditionally approve the two of them tonight?
Okay.
Now, do we have to go through any rules to expand it, or just do we do that in the?
I think it's
Well,
up to
we
the
can't
Greens.
I don't think we can take any official action beyond appointments tonight. That's why at the very end of the thing, we only have a discussion about the solar ad hoc committee. So I would suggest that we just conditionally, since these folks went through the process and we're prepared next week to take official action to expand it to two more spots, let's not relegate them to next week's meeting. Let's announce their conditional appointment tonight, assuming that 8 of us don't change our minds next week or something.
Okay, well then I need a motion to,
So moved.
well, how about we need to do what you wanted?
Collectively.
We do
Those
it
two guys,
Okay.
those two people for those two spots. I mean, what we're going to consider next week is the expansion of 2, not the expansion of 1 or 2. If we only do 1, then we'll have to pick one next week, draw straws or something.
Might I ask that we ask our solicitor? I don't know that we can take a conditional action based upon an ordinance that has not been enacted. And in the past, when we've changed the size of boards, we have not voted on those appointees, even though we're confident who they are. But I don't know how we can even take conditional action on an ordinance that doesn't legally exist.
I'd like to make the recommendation that at the work session in February, we take a look at the composition of all our boards with the intention of increasing or setting terms that are more realistic based upon the interviews that we had this year. We have a lot of talented people, very limited places to put these people that want to volunteer. And there's a couple of boards that we talked about during the interview process of expanding, specifically Parks and Rec, the Grange, and one or two others that need more advice to us and get a greater cross-section of input from the residents.
I would agree. I think we need to consider expanding the board. Those of us who participated in the interview process were impressed by the quality and the number of applicants. And I think it behooves us to do everything we can to encourage participation by community members. I agree with Commissioner Wexler.
And Dan, I don't dismiss your issues involving, the law and procedure. They're for real. I thought it important tonight that we at least identify these folks by name. They went through, especially since one is a reappointment. And if I didn't think we were going to get that, I would have done the reappointment.
Well, I have no problem doing that, but
Yeah.
my concern is a formal vote that
That's
would
fair.
appear to have an imprimatur of the board when we can't do it.
I would agree with Commissioner Siegel. We've named them and just a formality, but I think we should do what also Commissioner Waxler suggested, is to review the various other boards that we might want to add some additional folks to, given our talent pool.
All right, if there are no objections, then we'll table this votes, and we'll put this on the February work session to discuss expanding a number of whatever boards we wish to.
Well, we're not going to put this off to February, right? I mean, we contemplated doing this. I mean, there's no reason why we can't take action next week to expand the Friends of the Grange by 2.
I'll make the suggestion that we double check and see if this even requires an ordinance, since it's the Friends of the Grange's board, if they want the additional volunteers or not. I don't believe it's our call, but
Yeah,
we can ask and find out for sure.
I'm saying is, I don't think it was Mr. Wexler's intention that we postpone till February these 2 people. Bill
If
was
we don't have
asking
to-
in February, right?
If it doesn't require an ordinance, then absolutely not.
yeah,
And I've served on the board of the Grange for years, and I know that they would just be thrilled with these guys.
Additional volunteers.
right.
Yeah.
So it's contingent on whether or not it requires an ordinance. I don't think it does, but we can find that out in the next week.
Correct.
Okay. Moving on, the Health Advisory Board, I believe there's one 5-year term or
President,
promotions.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to nominate Amanda Jones to the Health Advisory Board.
Second.
Mr. President, I would like to nominate Alan Adler.
Is there a second?
Second.
The other nominations?
Motion to close.
Second?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Emilio. Mr. Berman, can you call the roll?
Mr. D'Amelio,
Alan Adler, please.
Mr. Oliva,
Dr. Adler?
Mr. McCluskey,
Amanda Jones.
Mr. Siegel,
Jones.
Mr. Lewis,
Dr. Adler.
Mr. Holmes,
Ms. Jones.
Mr. Quinn, I'm sorry, Mr. Wexler,
Ms. Jones.
Mr. Quinn,
Go with that. We're Dr. Adler.
Dr. Hart,
Ms. Jones. Congratulations, Ms. Jones.
This is another board, Mr. President, that we're talking about expanding.
Exactly. Yeah, we had numerous
Extraordinary
candidates.
applicants.
I would definitely be in favor of expanding that board.
Absolutely. We have so many good people.
Next is the Historical Commission, a 4-year term. I believe there are 2.
Mr. President. Mr. President.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Holmes.
I would move to reappoint Susan Baruka to this position.
Is there a second?
Second?
Seconded by Mr. Oliva. Any other nominations? Motion to close?
Motion to close.
Second?
Second.
Mr. Berman, can you call the roll?
Mr. D'Amelio.
Ms. Baraco?
Mr. Oliva.
Susan Bruco.
Mr. McCluskey.
Baruco.
Mr. Siegel.
Ms. Baruka,
Mr. Lewis.
Ms. Baruka.
Mr. Holmes.
Ms. Baruka.
Mr. Wexler.
Ms. Peruka.
Mr. Quinn.
Baruka.
Dr. Hart.
Ms. Baruka. And we have nominations to appoint the second member.
Mr. President, I would like to nominate Tim Lucci.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other nominations? Motion to close?
Sorry, Mr. President,
Yes.
I'd like to nominate Michael Harris.
Okay, is there a second?
second.
Seconded by Mr. Siegel. Any other nominations? Motion to close?
Motion to close.
Second?
Seconded by Mr. Oliva. Mr. Berman, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. D'Amelio.
Tim Lucci?
Mr. Oliva.
Tim Lucci.
Mr. McCluskey.
Mr. Lucci.
Mr. Siegel.
Matthew Robertson.
Was he one of
He
the
wasn't
nominees?
nominated.
No, sorry,
Michael Harris.
Michael Harris. Sorry, I was looking at my notes and confused the two. Too many good people.
Right.
Mr. Lewis.
Tim Lucci.
Mr. Holmes.
Mr. Harris.
Mr. Wexler.
Tim Lucci.
Mr. Quinn.
Tim Lucci.
Dr. Hart.
Mr. Lucci. Congratulations, Mr. Lucci. Next board is two appointments to Human Relations Commissions for 3-year terms.
President.
Yes, Mr. Holmes.
Mr. President, I would like to nominate Jen Gregoris for the Human Relations Commission.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Second?
Seconded by Mr. Siegel. Any other nominations? Is there a motion to close?
Motion to close.
Second?
Second?
Seconded by Mr. Oliva. Mr. Berman, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. D'Amelio.
Jennifer how you say it? How you say it? Gregoris.
Mr. Oliva.
Jennifer Gregoris.
Mr. McCluskey.
Ms. Gregoris.
Mr. Siegel.
Ms. Kegaris.
Mr. Lewis.
Ms. Kegaris.
Mr. Holmes.
Ms. Gregoris.
Mr. Wexler.
Ms. Kegaris.
Mr. Quinn.
Ms. Kegaris.
Dr. Hart.
Ms. Kegaris. Congratulations, Ms. Kegaris. And for the second opening,
Mr. President, I'd like to appoint Christine Tassoni to serve on the Human Relations Commission for a 3-year term to expire December 31st, 2023.
Second.
seconded by Mr. Holmes. Any other nominations? Have a motion to close?
Motion to close.
D'Amelio,
Second?
seconded by Mr. Oliva. Mr. Berman, can you call the roll?
Mr. D'Amelio.
Christine Tassani.
Mr. Oliva.
Christine Tassani.
Mr. McCluskey.
Kev.
Kevin.
Am I muted? I said Ms. Tassani. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Siegel.
Mr. Cesani.
Mr. Lewis.
Ms. Tassani.
Mr. Holmes.
Ms. Tassani.
Mr. Wexler.
Ms. Tassani.
Mr. Quinn.
Tassani.
Dr. Hart.
Ms. Tassani. Congratulations, Ms. Tassani.
Mr. President, before we move on, and I know they've all been difficult votes, but we really had this is another area where we had exceptionally qualified candidates, and this was not These were not easy decisions, and just I feel great about the future of this township with the character and integrity and credentials of the people willing to serve in these volunteer positions for us.
I totally agree. The candidates, especially for this one, but for almost all of our boards, were incredibly well qualified.
Mr. President,
Yes.
one other point, and for those who remember the challenges of even getting the Human Relations Commission, one thing that we apparently have overlooked over the years is that we do not have a liaison from this board to the Human Relations Commission. And I think it would behoove us to do so that we have someone who attends and reports back. In the past, it's been done very well, primarily informally by Commissioner Holmes and others. But I think we need to formalize that in the future because this is an important board, particularly with the passage of the recent Fair Housing Bill Act ordinance and things like that.
Mr. Siegel, I totally agree with you. It's something we should do. We should also look at having someone from the Haverford Bureau of Fire report every month as well.
Mr. Siegel, is that something that's going to require a board vote, or is it just we can appoint someone?
I believe we can appoint. I don't think we need a vote. It's not in the Human Relations Commission Act. They can't vote on the ordinance, and it's a liaison. I don't know that we need a full board of, people doing it, but I think we do need some. It would behoove us to have that type of person there.
I totally agree with you.
Mr. Siegel, you're the one to do it. So next week when we act more officially, we'll all validate that.
I'd welcome the opportunity.
Okay, moving on to the Parks and Recreation Board, there are 3 5-year terms. Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mr. President, I make a motion to appoint Rich Corrado. Reappoint Mr. Rich Corrado.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Oliva. Any other nominations?
President, I make a motion to appoint Jamie Gillazan.
Second.
Any other nominations? Motion to close?
Motion to close.
Second? Have a second on the motion to close?
Second.
Second by Mr. Oliva. Mr. Berman, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. D'Amelio.
Mr. Berman, can you call the roll? I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was muted. Mr. D'Amelio.
Mr. Corrado.
Mr. Oliva.
Mr. Corrado.
Mr. McCluskey.
Gillazan.
Mr. Siegel.
Gillazan.
Mr. Lewis.
Corrado.
Mr. Holmes.
Jamie Gelosian.
Mr. Wexler.
Mr. Corrado.
Mr. Quinn.
Rich Corrado.
Dr. Hart.
Ms. Jillison. Congratulations to reappoint Mr. Corrado. We have a second.
Mr. President, I'd like to nominate Jamie Gillazan.
Second.
Any other nominations?
Motion to close.
Is there a second?
Second.
No. Seconded by Commissioner Oliva. Mr. Berman, call the roll, please.
Mr. D'Amelio.
Mr. Lozan.
Mr. Oliva.
Mr. Lozia.
Mr. McCluskey.
Gillazan.
Mr. Siegel.
Gillazan.
Mr. Lewis.
Jamie Gillazan.
Mr. Holmes.
Jamie Gelosian.
Mr. Wexler.
Mr. Lozan.
Mr. Quinn.
Gillazan.
Dr. Hart.
Ms. Jillosian. Congratulations, Ms. Jillosian. Our final, the third spot.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Holmes.
I move we appoint Sean Gallagher to the Parks and Rec Board.
There a second?
Second.
Second.
Mr. President, I would move to nominate Dr. Timothy Walsh.
There a second?
Second.
Any other nominations?
I'd like to nominate Kate Montesano.
Montesano?
Montesano.
And is there a second for that?
Second.
Any other nominations? Motion to close,
Motion to close.
second? Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Holmes?
Mr. President, can I get clarification? Does the person who, does somebody have to get 5 votes to get this appointment or just a plurality?
I believe it's a plurality, but if someone who's been on the
Mr.
board.
Byrne?
If we have a quorum and we have 2 people that we're voting for.
3.
Three.
That's why I'm asking, yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to get, you definitely have to get a plurality for sure.
That wasn't my question. So does that person have to get 5 votes?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it might be better to do it as separate votes, because you're gonna come down to not having fair representation of all the people with 3 people in there, do you think?
Well, I mean, if you don't get a top vote getter, you just drop the bottom vote getter.
Right.
They all get 3.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we, could I move to table until we
Yeah,
figure this out next week?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I really don't.
I'm looking at the township, the code. It's silent on that issue. And as to the part,
I'd move to table.
I can't think of the time we.
Second the table.
And can we have a vote on the motion to table?
Yeah, we have a second. Mario.
Mr. Berman, would you call the roll?
On the motion to table, Mr. D'Amelio,
Yes.
Mr. Oliva,
Yes.
Mr. McCluskey.
No.
Mr. Siegel,
no.
Mr. Lewis,
Yes.
Mr. Holmes,
No.
Mr. Quinn. I'm
Yes.
sorry, I beg your pardon, Mr. Wexler.
No.
Mr. Quinn,
Gave away the vote, yes.
Dr. Hart.
No.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 noes.
Okay, so we're gonna move ahead and,
I mean, the rationale is, this is one of the boards that we want to expand.
Yeah, but we don't, but Jim doesn't know whether we need to have 5 votes or not, so I don't know how.
Well, that's all right. Let's take a vote. And if somebody gets 5 votes, it doesn't matter. If all 3 people get
Yeah,
3
it
votes,
does.
it doesn't
It
matter.
does matter.
How does it matter, Steve? If somebody gets 5 votes, they have a majority and they have it.
They have it, you're right.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
Okay.
You're right.
And just let me finish my point. If everybody
Go
gets
ahead.
3 votes, we got a 3-way tie. And if somebody ends up with 4 votes, 3 votes, and 2 votes, we'll just hold that vote and we'll get an opinion from our solicitor between now and next week as to whether the person with 4 votes won.
I agree.
You all right with that, Dean Siegel?
Yeah, I'm just looking, because everything in the sections relating to boards is silent as to whether it is a majority or plurality. The only time it talks about that is a majority is needed to remove a board member.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an answer that's found in Robert's rules. I think that's where I'm gonna have to go for that answer, because I don't think our codes say it, but I would be not telling you the truth if I just told you now and guessed on it. So I think the solution is reasonable, and I'll have you an answer tomorrow.
Great. Want to repeat the names, Mr. President?
sure, they are Sean Gallagher, Tim Walsh, and Kate Montessori?
Montesano.
Montesano.
John Gallagher, Tim Walsh.
Okay, Mr. Berman, want to call the roll?
Mr. D'Amelio,
Sean Gallagher.
Mr. Oliva,
Dr. Timothy Walsh.
Mr. McCluskey,
John Gallagher.
Mr. Siegel,
John Gallagher,
Mr. Lewis,
Dr. Timothy Walsh.
Mr. Holmes,
Sean Gallagher.
Mr. Wexler,
Dr. Tim Walsh.
Mr. Quinn,
Gallagher.
Dr. Hart.
Mr. Gallagher.
Gallagher has 6.
Correct.
Congratulations, Mr. Gallagher, and we will hopefully be expanding this board because it was another one where there were certainly people that could add a lot to the board. Okay, moving ahead to the zoning hearing board, one opening for a 5-year term. Do I have a motion?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Holmes.
Mr. President, I move we appoint Jesse Poynton to the zoning board.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Wexler. Any other nominations?
Motion to close.
I move we
I would
close.
like to not nominate Chuck Reardon.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Quinn. Any other nominations? Is there a motion to close?
Motion to close. Second.
And Mr. Berman, can you call the roll?
Mr. D'Amelio,
Chuck Reardon?
Mr. Oliva,
Chuck Reardon.
Mr. McCluskey,
Jesse Poynton.
Mr. Siegel,
Jesse Poynton.
Mr. Lewis,
Chuck Reardon.
Mr. Holmes,
Jesse Poynton.
Mr. Wexler,
Mr. Poynton.
Mr. Quinn,
Chuck Reardon.
Dr. Hart.
Jesse Poynton. Congratulations, Mr. Poynton. Okay, the next is the Planning Commission. There are 2 openings for 4-year terms, and with the Mr. Poynton being appointed to the zoning hearing board, there will be an appointment for his unexpired term, which I believe has 2 years to run, but I'm not sure.
It expires 2021, December.
1 year run, okay.
And we'll do that last, Mr. President?
We'll do that last. Let's do the 4-year terms first.
Mr. President? Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Motion to reappoint Rob Fiordamundo to serve on the Planning Commission for a 4-year term to expire December 31st, 2024.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Holmes. Any other nominations?
Yeah, motion to reappoint Chuck Reardon to the Planning Commission.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Oliva. Is there a motion to close?
So moved.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Oliva. Mr. Berman, can you call the roll, please?
All right, just trying to keep up. Mr. D'Amelio,
Mr. Reardon?
Mr. Oliva,
Chuck Reardon.
Mr. McCluskey,
Rondo.
Mr. Siegel,
Mr. Fiordamundo.
Mr. Lewis,
Chuck Reardon.
Mr. Holmes,
Fiordamundo.
Mr. Wexler,
Reappoint Mr. Fiamundo.
Mr. Quinn,
Reardon.
Dr. Hart.
Reappoint Mr. Fiordamundo. Congratulations, Mr. Fiordamundo.
Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. Holmes.
President, for the next spot, I recommend that we appoint Julie Phillips.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. McCloskey. Other nominations?
Yes, I would like to nominate Mr. Chuck Reardon.
And a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Oliva. Motion to close?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. And a second.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. D'Amelio. Okay, Mr. Berman, would you call the roll?
Mr. D'Amelio,
Mr. Reardon?
Mr. Oliva,
Chuck Reardon.
Mr. McCluskey,
Phillips.
Mr. Siegel,
Phillips.
Mr. Lewis,
Chuck Reardon.
Mr. Holmes,
Ms. Phillips.
Mr. Wexler,
Phillips.
Mr. Quinn,
Chuck Reardon.
Dr. Hart,
Ms. Phillips,
Congratulations, Ms.
Ms.
Phillips.
Phillips. Okay, and finally, a motion to appoint to the Planning Commission for the unexpired one-year term of Mr. Poynton.
I'd like to make a recommendation to appoint Matthew Robertson to serve the unexpired term, reigning for 1 year in the planning commission.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Holmes. Have other nominations?
I'd like to reappoint Chuck Reardon.
And a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Oliva. A motion to close?
Motion to close.
And a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Holmes. Okay, Mr. Berman, if you're ready.
Mr. D'Amelio,
Chuck Reardon.
Mr. Oliva,
Awkward.
Mr. McCluskey,
Robertson.
Mr. Siegel,
Reardon.
Mr. Lewis,
Chuck Reardon.
Mr. Holmes,
Mr. Robertson.
Mr. Wexler,
Matthew Robertson.
Mr. Quinn,
Chuck Reardon.
Dr. Hart,
Mr. Robertson.
we have 5 for Mr. Reardon, yes.
Congratulations, Mr. Reardon, on your reappointment. Okay, the next is appointments to the Senior Citizens Advisory Council. These are one-year terms. Mr. D'Amelio, do you have a,
No, I'm gonna, postpone mine till next meeting.
okay, Mr. Oliva,
Yeah, mine also.
okay, Mr. McCloskey? You're muted, Kevin.
I have the table.
Oh, table, okay, I'm sorry. Mr. Siegel,
Mark Cohen, reappointment.
okay. Mr. Lewis,
Vic Jabarski, a reappointment.
jack of all trades there. Mr. Holmes,
Joanne Town reappointment.
Mr. Wexler,
Rochelle Nacito, another jack of all trades.
A Jill of all trades?
You can please rise and join us in the pledge.
Mr. Quinn,
I will table.
and I will reappoint Ronald Pelchak. Next one is the Shade Tree Commission. We have 2 openings for 3-year terms. Do I have any motions?
Yeah,
Make a motion to appoint Paul Davitt.
second.
Seconded by Ms. Oliva. Any other nominations?
Motion to close.
There a second?
Motion to close. Second.
Okay. Mr. Berman, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. D'Amelio,
Mr. Davitt.
Mr. Oliva,
Paul Davitt.
Mr. McCluskey,
Mr. Davitt.
Mr. Siegel,
Paul Davitt.
Mr. Lewis,
Paul Davitt.
Mr. Holmes,
Mr. Davitt.
Mr. Wexler,
Mr. Davitt.
Mr. Quinn,
Paul Davitt.
Dr. Hart,
Reappoint Paul Davitt. And for the second 3-year term, do I have motions?
President, motion to appoint Christina Hansen.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other nominations? Have a motion to close?
Motion to close.
Second.
Mr. Berman, can you call the roll again?
Mr. D'Amelio,
Christine Hansen.
Mr. Oliva,
Christine Hansen.
Mr. McCluskey,
Hansen.
Mr. Siegel,
Hanson.
Mr. Lewis,
Christine Hansen.
Mr. Holmes,
Ms. Hanson.
Mr. Wexler,
Tina Hansen.
Mr. Quinn,
Ian Hansen.
Dr. Hart.
Ms. Hanson. Congratulations, Ms. Hanson. And for the vacancy committee, it's a 1-year term. Are there any motions to appoint?
Mr. President, I make a motion to appoint Dave Fabry.
Second.
Just a question, Mr. President. We appointed Mr. for
Do you go to the cable TV?
See, cable advisory board as well, so can you hold two?
There actually, I mean, we could go back. There is another candidate for the cable TV board if we, I don't know, we would have,
Oh. He's the only one that put in for vacancy. I mean, we can table it if you want to. I'm not a strong preference. He's the only one that applied for the vacancy one.
Yeah.
I'm fine tabling it. I can make a motion to table the vacancy.
Cable, maybe we talk to him, see what he's interested in, but we've already appointed him to cable, so.
I would suggest,
Second the table.
I think Mr. McCluskey has to withdraw his nomination then.
I'll withdraw my nomination. Fabric Vacancy Committee.
And then we move to table the whole item, right?
Correct.
Then I will move to table.
there's,
And I'll second the table.
okay,
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
fine, thank you. For the Vacancy Property Review Committee, a 5-year term.
Mr. President,
Yes,
I'd like to make a motion to appoint Ed Herzog to the
Second.
vacant property.
nominated by Mr. Oliva and seconded by Mr. D'Amelio. Are there any other nominations?
Close.
Motion to close.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Berman, can you call the roll?
Mr. D'Amelio,
Mr. Herzog.
Mr. Oliva,
Mr. Herzog,
Mr. McCluskey,
Mr. Herzog.
Mr. Siegel,
Herzog.
Mr. Lewis,
Mr. Herzog.
Mr. Holmes,
Mr. Herzog.
Mr. Wexler,
Mr. Herzog.
Mr. Quinn,
Evan Herzog.
Dr. Hart.
Mr. Herzog. Congratulations, Mr. Herzog. That ends our nomination for committee, well, for residents on committees. We are now there's a solar ad hoc committee.
Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. Holmes.
It's just a discussion point, so I won't belabor it. We've discussed it before, but what I'd like to do is at our next week's agenda, formally create an ad hoc committee for purposes of undertaking our solar effort. I'd like that committee to have 3 people appointed from the outside. And then that board would also have 1 commissioner liaison from the Board of Commissioners, and I think 1 person from, 2 people from the Board of Commissioners, 1 who's on finance and 1 who's on the property committee. And then I think we should have somebody from the Environmental Advisory Committee seconded over to the Solar Ad Hoc Committee as well. So that's the composition of this committee that I have in mind, and I think of them as the people who are going to evaluate for us and present to us the best approach for us to undertake the solar project that we all approved in our budget last month. Which building to use in the township first, what manufacturer to use, and probably talk to our financial advisor and confirm that the way we want to do this is a direct investment by the township as opposed to any of the other more complicated ways of accomplishing this financing. So that's what I have in mind. And since it is in our nature to discuss these things at a meeting prior to adopting it, and I don't want to waste any time, I wanted to put it on this agenda and just open the floor for questions or hear comments from anybody or suggestions as to how do we put this board together before next week's meeting.
Just to clarify, when you talked about the Environmental Advisory Board, you were talking about a commissioner from there or
No.
a member?
I mean, a member from that committee who would be, borrowed over to that committee to provide their experience and expertise on it, and then just have 2 commissioners, 1 from finance and 1 from property, involved in the discussions as well. And then the 3 the 3 people I have in mind were the 3 people that were really the point persons of the presentations that we saw starting in the summer, Victor Barsky, Jen Leith, and Joy Baxter. And those are the names that I would propose next week, but obviously anybody on the board who has a suggestion or anybody on the board who thinks the board should be bigger than that, I'm all ears.
I guess my question would be, I know when we did the Brookline School Ad Hoc Committee, we appointed commissioners who then invited residents who were interested in preservation of the school and other residents as well to attend. And I don't know, I mean, why? Not sure if the board needs to formally nominate residents. I mean, if you feel that's important, we can, but you could also get to commissioners and then reach out to the residents that you felt would give
Well,
you.
in part, I mean, the answer is that these are the people who already did a ton of homework and have already established credentials in this area and have done a great deal of our legwork. My hesitation at just saying we're going to have a meeting on this and invite, I mean, we can invite input anytime we want. Before we undertake the solar project, we could go ahead and have a public meeting where anybody can offer any input that they have. But I think we should take advantage of the expertise that has been demonstrated right in front of us as we've contemplated this situation. And the bigger committee, the longer it'll take for them to meet, the longer it'll take for them to come to consensus. And as I said, this doesn't prevent ultimately getting public input, but I would definitely prefer to streamline this group at the outset, because we have a very specific project in mind and we have a timeline in mind, which is do this in 2021. I don't think it has the same ramifications or invites the same kind of varying public input as tearing down a building people think is historic, or dealing with a library that has, this is, at the end of the day, this is hopefully a solar array that people can't even see on top of one of our buildings. So I'm really looking for much more technical expertise than public opinion. I'm going to regret saying that, but that's what I think.
Anybody else have any comments?
I mean, I think, there would be opportunity for plenty of public comment, both at the night of this committee's presentation to the board, and whenever we vote twice, presumably, to authorize either borrowing that is necessary and/or the spending of money. So I don't want it to make it seem like even by streamlining this, it would eliminate or even lessen the opportunity for the public to comment. But I tend to agree with Commissioner Holmes's larger point that this is a different type of issue than the Brookline School, whereby Brookline School was sort of a blank slate as what to do. This board's already approved the idea that we're going to pursue solar in some fashion. We approved that at our budget meeting, and I think, obviously, we didn't vote on actually spending the money then, but I think the majority of the board is interested, and I think it's a project we're interested in pursuing. So we're really just trying to get to the point of how, where, and what is the best process for it. So I tend to agree that for this ad hoc committee, it's a little bit different, and we should try to streamline it as much as possible by bringing the parties that have played a role to date together with, a member of the, 2 members of the commissioners and a member of the EAC.
I would tend to agree with Larry and with what you said, Kevin. I think it's a good idea to streamline the process and then bring it to the public.
Yeah, just a clarification. I think these meetings, though, you'd have to announce them to the public. I don't think we can be.
It'd be just like.
I don't think that's necessarily true. If we had a meeting with our financial advisor, we wouldn't announce it to the public.
No, but the ad hoc committee on the state hospital was always public meetings.
Well, the concern that I have, if you do certain aspects of these meetings public, is that if there are financial or real estate discussions, those could technically, I defer to Mr. Byrne, but I think those types of discussions could technically be held privately preliminarily, and then any discussions on final or more formal action would need to be public. But if we're discussing, which properties or impacts on adjoining properties or financial issues, I think there's a balance we have to juggle, and I think that's the concern, and that's why I agree with Mr. Holmes, Mr. McCluskey.
Thank you, Dan. And I would stress, streamlining does not mean lack of transparency. It means getting advice, getting a plan, and then presenting the plan and getting input, and allowing the public to see it and comment on it. But streamlining, the point of streamlining is for us to come get good information and put that information into a plan.
Okay, well, Mr.
I
Holmes,
mean, I agree with that. The difference between the Haverford State ad hoc committee and those other committees was that we were trying to make a decision. And so we need a public input. We already know what we want to do here. We already know that we want solar panels. We want to put them on our buildings. And so we just need the technical people to put this all together and then present it to the public.
if there's no further discussion, Mr. Holmes, if you would, for next week's meeting, draw up a motion, okay, we can vote on it at that meeting.
I will. For the listening audience, I put a thumb up. Yes, I will put together a package for us to consider for this committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
That completes our appointments and the agenda. Are there any other announcements?
Just Happy New Year to everybody. Happy and healthy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Yeah. Happy New Year.
Okay, we are adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.